Just say good things about him.
Well, it will be recorded.
Well, I was going to say it before I started preaching. Okay, we're going to be talking about Obadiah today, if I get that far. But have any of you ever heard a sermon preached about Obadiah?
No.
No. You know, there was a survey taken one time from Christian people about which book that they read most in the Bible. And you know, Obadiah was last on the list. Nobody hardly ever reads Obadiah. And even the book of Leviticus, which is the book of the law, beat out Obadiah. You know, more people read Leviticus than they did Obadiah. Now, you know, and I sort of, when I was in Bible school, you know, I didn't mind reading it because I could read that book like that. It's only 21 verses. But then when you start studying it and thinking about it and comparing Scripture with Scripture and find out what it's all about, you know, J. Vernon McGee, who was a great preacher, and he was in charge of Dallas Theological Seminary. He was the dean of the college there at one time. And then he said, you know, Obadiah is like an atom bomb in the Scriptures. He said, even though it's very small and very tiny, it has a very powerful punch. And then when you start to see what Obadiah is all about, then you realize, yeah, it is like an atom bomb. But in order to appreciate Obadiah, you have to go back to many other verses and find out what's going on. Okay? Now there are 4 prophets. Well, you know, there are more prophets, but there's called the major prophets. They're the ones that write a lot, the big books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Lamentations. But then there are other prophets that are called minor prophets just because they're smaller books. Not that they're less important, but they're smaller books. And this is the shortest book in the Old Testament. Now, I'm going to start, well, there are 4 of these minor prophets who we know almost nothing about. You know, and when you say, who is Obadiah? I don't know. But what he prophesied is coming true and has come true in part and will come true in later part. Now, there are 4 of these minor prophets we know hardly anything about. And that is Obadiah, Habakkuk, we studied Habakkuk, Haggai, and Malachi. Now, these are ones, all we know basically is a name. Some of them we know about the time where they were prophesying, but not everything. Now, I'm going to read a couple of verses here, and then I'm going to go back to other scriptures and other places, so you don't have to keep turning. I've got markers in mind, so I have an idea where I want to go. I might get lost, but I'm sure that you'll correct me. Right? Okay. Now, the reason this is important, it says, the vision of Obadiah. Now, he had a vision. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. And the question comes up, who is Edom? And we're going to answer that. And he says, we have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador, or a messenger, is sent among the heathen. And that word heathen was translated heathen, but it could mean nations. Okay? Whenever they use the word heathen, it's anybody who's not a member of God's family is a heathen, or it's a different nation. Okay? And he says, There was a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen, or among the nations. Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rocks, and we're going to find out what that means, whose habitation is high, and saith in his heart, who shall bring me down? He says, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring you down, saith the Lord. He says, number 3, I wanted to emphasize verse 3. The pride of your heart has brought you down, okay? And it's deceived you. Now, pride is one of the most dangerous sins, because pride will blind you of the fact that you are proud. You know, and I want to turn back here to Proverbs chapter 6. I got all these markers in here. Proverbs chapter 6. And let me see. Good, I didn't write it down in there. Proverbs chapter 6 says this. And this is the Lord, or Solomon is saying this, but he's getting this information from the Lord. These 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination. You know, that was like before we said, for 3 transgressions and for 4 I will not withhold the punishment. Here it's a similar thing. For 6, even 7 things I despise. He says, a proud look. That's number 1 on his hate parade. A proud look. A lying tongue, and hands that spread or shed innocent blood. A heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, and a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. There are 6 things he said he hates. And as we go through Obadiah, we're going to see these things are happening in Edom's life. Now, Edom, we're going to find about him in a minute, but I just wanted to let you know that. But also, I want you to know in the book of Psalms, I'm going to go to Psalms 1 and 2. Psalms 1 and 2. Now, Psalms 1 says there's 2 ways or 2 walks of life. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, and does not stand or associate with the sinners. And he doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. He's not downsizing, not down criticizing anybody. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law doth he meditate day and night. Then he goes on and says, what's going to happen? He's going to prosper. He's like a tree by the water. But in verse 4 it says, the ungodly are not so, for they are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Now he's saying there's 2 walks of life. There's one who trusts God, looks in his word, wants to know what God expects of him in this life, and he likes to follow along that path. Now the other is ungodly. That doesn't mean he's wicked. That doesn't mean that he's a vile person. It just means he has no need for God. He has no need for God because he thinks that I can run my own life the way that I want to run my own life. I don't need God to tell me what to do. And that's what Edom's problem was. So there are two ways of life, either God's way or my way. Okay? Then when you get to Psalms 2, now this is God and Jesus and possibly some of the angels in heaven are sitting there, and this is God having a conversation with Jesus. Now remember, this is a psalm of David, and David was the king of Israel. And through his line, the Messiah was to come. And so here, God has given David, David probably had no idea what he was saying when he said this. He says, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed one." Now God is God the Father. The anointed one is Jesus, his Son. He says, they take counsel against the anointed one, saying, "Let us break their bands asunder, and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, and the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy mountain of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I will give thee the heathen for your inheritance, and the utmost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Now what he's saying God has a plan. God has a plan from the very beginning creation of the earth, even before that, how man was going to fall, and he had a plan of redemption that he even told the devil that my son is going to crush your head. You might hurt his heel, but he's going to crush your head. And all through the scriptures, God is working out this plan that he has. And he says, I have set my king in Zion, and that's Israel, and on the holy mountain. And now, when Jesus came, he said, they were saying back here, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? They hated Jesus when he came. And they took counsel. Pilate and Herod, and the religious leaders, all of them took counsel against Jesus. And God says, I'm going to laugh up there because they think if they kill him, then he's done with it. He said, but that's not so. He says, I am going to set my king on Mount Zion, and that's going to be at the end times when Jesus comes back and reigns and rules for 1,000 years. Now, so we see that there are two ways of life, God's way or our way, and then we say there's a plan that God has for salvation, and he says, if you choose my way and you follow my instructions and you love me the way that I asked you to, you will be fine. You'll be free from all of that destruction. But if you choose your own way, the Bible says, there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Okay, now, we want to say, we don't know who Obadiah is, but we know that he's a prophet. Also, that this whole prophecy of Obadiah is found in the book of Jeremiah in chapter 49. We're not going to turn there. But I want to say, okay, who is Edom? Now I'm going to go back here to Genesis chapter 36. Genesis, I got Exodus, I don't want Exodus. Okay, Genesis 36, and listen to this. Now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wife of the daughters of Canaan, and of Elon, I'm not going to read it all, of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Arah, the daughter of Zebion, the Hittite. Now, Esau took two wives, one from a Hittite and one from a Hivite. But then, these wives of Esau displeased his mother and father because they were always complaining and this, and they were a foreign group. Okay? So then, when Esau saw that, he took another wife who was Ishmael's descendant. So there he had three wives, Ishmael, and so all of these conglomerates are relative to the Arab people over there in Israel. So here he says, and I'm going to skip down, he says, thus, in verse 8, it says, thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. Okay, so we know Esau is Edom, his descendants. Now, I want to go back a little bit farther so we can make clear who Esau was. Then I'm going to go back to Genesis chapter 25. And it says here, and these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife. Okay, and then he says, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. It meant that he went to God and prayed and asked that she would have a child. Now, God has a plan all through here. And then he says in verse 22, 21. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord entreated him of Rebekah, his wife, and she conceived. Now, over here a little bit later, we're going to see that he was 40 years old when he got married. And so she didn't have a child until he was 60 years old. So there was 20 years there went by that they didn't have any children. And then it says this in verse 22. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. So she's asking, she said, Lord, this is a hard pregnancy I'm going through. And I am upset almost to the point of death. You know, that there's a struggle. Is something wrong with the pregnancy? And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations. Oh boy, that's a lot of people. Huh? 2 nations are in your womb. And 2 manners of people shall be separated from your bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days were accomplished that she should be delivered, and were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Now, Esau is sort of like hairy red. Okay? Now, Edom also means red. And then we're going to see later on, and after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. Now he was 60 now, before he was 40. And then, this is the important part here. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man. It means that he was a mama's boy. He stayed at home. He liked to cook. He liked to bake and do things like that. But Esau liked to rough and tumble, go out and hunt and shoot things and climb trees or whatever young men do. And then he said, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac, here's the key part, Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now here we got parents who have a favorite child. Okay? Now, this is the important part. And Jacob had pottage or soup, and Esau came out from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. He was red, he was hairy, and he loved red soup, and so they called him Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day your birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he swore unto him, and he sold him his birthright. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage and lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, this is something that is extremely important, because in those days, the father of the family was in charge. The oldest son was to receive the birthright. And the birthright was that when the father died, the oldest son got a double portion of all that the father had, and then he became the authority in the family. Okay? And so then it was supposed to be, Esau was supposed to have that birthright, because as you go down through the line, he would have been the one that the Messiah, Jesus, would have come through. But God, in his foreknowledge, he knows everything. He knows the end from the beginning. He told her, here, you got two nations in you. And the oldest one, who was Esau, is going to serve the youngest one, who is Jacob. And the only way they could do that is if Jacob got the birthright. But Jacob could have waited until something happened and he got the birthright righteously. But as you go through the story, you see that here is Isaac. He tells his son Esau, "Go out and get me some of that venison. I'm really hungry." And so he says, "And then I will bless you and tell you all about the birthright." So here, Rebekah hears this, and so she tells her son, Jacob, "Go out and kill the lamb and bring it in real fast, and I'll make stuff." And he said, "Well, my dad will know it's not me." He said, "Because he's all hairy and I'm smooth." He said, "What do I do?" She said, "Don't worry, give me the skin." And they fix it all up, put it on his arms and put it on his neck. they're deceiving the father because he's almost blind now. And he says, as Jacob bringing this pottage into him, he said, the voice is Jacob. And he said, come here and close. Let me feel your neck. And he feels him on the neck. He says, it sounds like Jacob, but it must be Esau. And so the father gave him the birthright. And this is important too, is once the word comes out of your mouth and the blessing is received, you can't take it back. Even though you were tricked into doing it. So this is then Esau, and then the mother says, oh, get out of there real fast. Then Esau comes in, and Esau's begging. He said, who are you? He says, I'm Esau. He says, Esau was just here. He said, oh, it was Jacob. He tricked me. And then here's the Esau saying, oh, Father. And he's begging his father. He says, don't you have a blessing for me? He says, I made you servant to your younger brother, and you will be serving him all your life. And then he thought in his heart, he said, when my father Isaac dies, I'm going to kill Jacob. And his mother heard that, and she said, get out of here, go up to your uncle's house, her brother's house, which is a couple 100 miles away. Okay? So now, all through this series that Esau hated Jacob, and Jacob was up there, and finally, when Jacob was coming back, that's when he got to this place and he was exhausted, and it was told him that, now this is like 20 years later, and it told him that Esau is coming with 400 men. And Jacob says, oh, Lord, he says, I'm going to be done in. So he sends on some goats and sheep and some people. Then after they go a little bit, he sends another group out and another group. And thinking that, man, if I give all these as a gift to him, he won't kill me. And so he stays there by himself at this place, puts a rock down, and that's when he sees this ladder. And he says, angels descending and everything, going up and down the ladder. And then finally, that's where he's wrestling with the angel, he thinks, but it's the Lord in what we would call a theophany. I always want to say epiphany. But theophany means God in the appearance of a human. And so he's wrestling with them, and finally that the angel says, or the Lord says, let me go. The day is coming. Let me go. And Jacob is holding on for dear life, and he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And what did he say? He said, what is your name? See, he lied to his father. He lied, several times. And the thing is, his name, Jacob, means heel catcher, or person to trip her up or person. And he says, my name is Jacob. And God says, you will no longer be called Jacob. You're no longer a heel catcher. You're going to be called Israel. That it means the Prince of God. Okay? Now, so Esau should have received the birthright, but he didn't. And so, but God knew this. That's why he said the older is going to serve the younger. And so here, and the Lord has all these little things that jump out at you, that Esau and Jacob, once they made sort of semi-friends, they lived in the same area, but they had so much wealth that the land couldn't hold them all. So it says that Esau took all that he had, and he went down to a land below the Dead Sea to a mountain that was called Seir. S-E-I-R, Seir. Now, the meaning of Seir means red, hairy, or shaggy. So here you got Edom, who is red, hairy, and you've got Esau, who is red and hairy, and he's going to live in his place. called Seir, and it's shaggy. So anyway, that he goes down there. But now, Jacob, because of a famine in the land, he went down to Egypt. And it was told Abraham that they were going to be down there for 400 years. Now, you know, Jacob has finally died and Esau's finally died. But now they're both a nation. You know, here's Esau up here in Mount Seir. And here's Jacob, his descendants, are down in Egypt as slaves. And when Moses eventually brings them out, and God gives them the 10 Commandments and all of that, and they're on their way, God says to Moses, I want you to go up through Esau's land, but you are not going to depossess him. You're not going to fight against him. He says, because I am not going to give you not even a foot breadth of the property that he has, because I have given it to them. Okay? And he said, you are not to fight against them. But when Moses got up there, he goes up and he says to the leader, the king there, he says, let us go by, you know. And he said, we won't drink your water, we won't eat your meat, we just want to pass by friendly like, because we're going to the other side of the Jordan. And so here, Edom sent out troops and said, you will not get through here. There's still that hatred that's there, that animosity they felt they should have. Now, so we know who Edom is. Edom is Esau. And then we know who Esau is. He's a twin brother of Jacob. Now, Esau is a type of the flesh. You know, he was willing to sell his birthright for a bowl of soup, not realizing he had no regard for a birthright. But Jacob sort of knew that this birthright is worth something, you know. It's pride. But anyway, so Edom now is in Mount Seir, and then you stop to think Mount Seir is going to be extremely important in the end of days. Now, if you ever heard, let me jump over here back to Obadiah. Oh, I went too far. Let me say this one part. And this is in the last book of Malachi. Now, you know, God loved Jacob. And he says here in Malachi chapter 1, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet you say, wherein have you loved us? Then the Lord said, was not Esau Jacob's brother, said the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Now see, he's saying he hated Esau, but he's saying Esau was representative of that whole nation. Esau was arrogant, you know. He didn't want their birthright. And these people of Edom didn't care about God. You know, they thought they were self-sufficient. Now, they lived in Mount Seir, and in Mount Seir is where the city of Petra is. Now, if you look up Petra, Petra is a city that's carved out of the rock. There's down below the Dead Sea, there's the great mountains and ravines down through there. And there's this one ravine that it's probably about a half a mile long, but it narrows down so that you can get a couple of people until you funnel down in. Then it gets to a very narrow place where you could barely get a man and a horse in through there. Okay? And so when you get down, then you have to go through this. Then eventually it opens up to a great wide canyon. Sort of like if you ever seen the Grand Canyon, something like that. And so this is what made them feel that they were secure. is because no army could form themselves and come through that narrow passage because they could just pick them off one at a time as they were coming through. And so this is what he was saying here, is that the pride of your heart hath deceived you, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rocks, whose habitation is high, that said in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Now here, when you get back in there, this is a beautiful city that's carved out of the rock. I mean, you know, rock on this side and rock on this side, and the cliffs are 200 feet high. But back inside of those rocks, they have carved out rooms that are big enough to hold 5,000 or more people. So look up Petra sometime and see. I think it was National Geographic had a major article about this back, probably in the 1900s. And it was amazing to see the beautiful stuff. So here we can say that they had pride, that they were high up. Nobody could get them. Okay? Then he says here, though thou shalt exalt thyself as the eagle, because the eagle is high flying. And then they were dwelling high up in those cliffs, up in those caves. And don't think of a caveman. These were elaborate, places. And he says, if thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how are you cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? He said, you might have a couple of thieves come in, but they would get whatever they wanted. They wouldn't take away everything. They'd get enough and they would leave. And he said the same thing with the grape gatherers. If they came into you, they would leave some grapes. He said because they couldn't carry it all. He says, how are the things of Esau searched out? How are the hidden things sought up or brought up? And that's what he's saying. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. And then the Lord said, shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men of Eden, and understanding out of the mouth of Esau, and the mighty men of Teman shall be dismayed, to the end that every one that of the mouth of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. Now, to tie this back to another book, and I'm going to stop here and I'll pick it up next week. But as we get those other verses, God's going to tell you why he has this hatred toward Esau. And it all has to do with pride and things that they had done. So the last couple of verses are extremely important. But here, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, how are the things of Esau? He said, and the men had conformed a confederacy. Now, when the Israelis were being attacked from the north, okay, then sometimes the people would have too many prisoners to disperse them, and they would take them around and give them to Edom. The Palestinians, when they were fighting against David and other people, and they took captives, they brought them around and gave them to Esau's Edom, So they were taking prisoners and using them as slaves, and these other people who were attacking Israel, eventually they turned on Edom. And Edom didn't realize that they were going to be last. But if you look at the book we just finished, Edom was one of the last places that was going to be destroyed. Okay? So God told Amos that he's going to destroy up there in Damascus. He's going to destroy Assyria. He's going to go over to Babylon. He's going to destroy Babylon. He's going to have the Medes and the Persians are going to come in. And he said, and then I'm going to go over to the Palestinians. And then I'm going to come down over here to Ammon and all of those Moab and those places. And we see all of those places have been destroyed. But when you read the last couple of verses here, you're going to see that God says that Israel is going to be restored. Now, we see Israel is restored. One thing we have to realize that God says that Israel is my people. If I want to discipline them, I will discipline them. But don't you go piling on. You know, because when he brought the Assyrians, he said, you had no right to go up there. And we're going to talk more about that next week. But I want you to know that God has a plan, and he's working that plan. So be here next week for hopefully the last couple of verses. It might take 2. No, not really. But